everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of Genesis of the Daleks, the fourth story of the 12th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Tom Baker as the fourth Doctor. Genesis of the Daleks is the 78th story overall, it's 6 parts long, and is written by Terry Nation. So the plot of Genesis of the Daleks is as follows. The Doctor's own people, the Time Lords, have foreseen a time in which the Daleks dominate all other life forms in the universe. So disturbing is this possibility that they break their own laws of time in an attempt to change the future. And who better to send on this quest than their own renegade number, the Doctor? Unwillingly transported into the fields and trenches of a battle-exhausted Skaro, the Doctor must face his most dangerous mission ever, to prevent the Daleks from ever being created. So, Genesis of the Daleks. Genesis of the Daleks is a bona fide classic Doctor Who story. I can see why so many classic Whovians consider Genesis of the Daleks to be one of the best, if not the best, according to the DVD sticker right here, the best Doctor Who story ever. I remember watching this story for the first time when I was like 14 years old, and it really, really had a hold on me, and it still has a hold on me to this day, to say the least. The production of this story was superb. It's a mix of both location filming and studio filming, as with most Doctor Who stories in the classic series. The setting of Skaro looked creepy, and I loved how war-ridden it was, and it actually reminded me of the war games, especially because of the war trenches and all that. I also liked the interior sets, like the where Davros had operated and the Thal camp. They looked impressive. The scripts were great. The direction by David Maloney was amazing, and I actually do think that this story is actually the best he's directed for Doctor Who. And I know he's directed a lot of other great stories, such as the War Games, but I think Genesis of the Daleks is probably his best direction ever. And he's also directed other great stories, and I actually kind of like it how his name is probably associated with some of the best Doctor Who stories ever directed. The story is fantastic as well, and I do believe that Genesis of the Daleks is also the best story that Terry Nation has actually written for Doctor Who, and I actually think the whole plot of the Doctor being sent to destroy the Daleks at birth was actually a very good plot, because it actually if the Doctor does go through, what the implication that could happen, and it's even explained in the story as well, and it's also a very important story in the Doctor Who mythology, because Genesis of the Daleks actually predates most of the Dalek, well, actually all the Dalek stories made up to this point. And so it takes place during the Thousand-Year War, after the Thousand-Year War, I believe, and at the end of Genesis of the Daleks, another new timeline is created of some sorts, because the Doctor actually trapped the Daleks in the tunnel and they couldn't get out for at least another 1,000 years, I believe. So because the Doctor actually did this, he delays the development for the same 1,000 years, and I think that these Daleks are pretty much the same Daleks that were from the first ever Dalek story to Death to the Daleks, with some developments here and there and a few changes in color and all that, but I think, but obviously because in the Daleks they weren't able to, like obviously Skaro had pretty much become a jungle, and the Daleks were pretty much confined to the Dalek city and they couldn't leave, and then Dalek Invasion of Earth came along and they were pretty much allowed to move, and had like a disc at the back. I think shortly after that they were able to move without the disc. And so obviously when Davros dies at the end of the story, he actually does survive, and then he creates Daleks that are loyal to him, thus causing a Dalek civil war, which is explored in the Dalek stories in the 1980s. And also I think this story actually, according to Russell T Davies, this story is pretty much one of the main causes of the last great turmoil between the Daleks and the Time Lord, which is actually explained in the new series. But obviously we'll get more into that whenever I do get to it. This story also had some very incredible moments as well, especially the part 1 cliffhanger when Sarah Jane was actually hidden behind I think she was hidden somewhere, and then she sees Davros and a few Daleks, so she pretty much witnessed the first Dalek extermination, pretty much killing some targets, but yeah, and I actually do think that moment pretty much stayed with her for pretty much her entire life. I think this is what pretty much caused her to actually tell the Doctor to actually go ahead and kill the Daleks, even though she actually did see them in Death to the Daleks in the last season, and obviously the Doctor must have told her about them at some point, but I think she was very eager to see the Doctor defeat the Daleks and kill them at birth. Another moment I actually thought was fantastic was when Davros captured the Doctor, Sarah, and Harry. And then Davros actually wanted to get the Doctor to tell him how come the Daleks were defeated every single time, and if he didn't, he'll pretty much kill Sarah and Harry, and then he was implying that he was applying the pressure of the torture to Sarah and Harry, and the Doctor pretty much had no choice but to tell them. And obviously, my favorite scene from the Tom Baker era and this story as well is the "Do I Have the Right" speech at the start of Part 6. "Do I Have the Right" speech pretty much comes from the start of Part 6, and it comes about when the Doctor actually has the chance to defeat and kill the Daleks once and for all, at their genesis no less, and then, but he's pretty much torn in doing so, and you have Sarah Jane right next to persuading him to do it, but the Doctor starts thinking he'll be no better than the Daleks and likens them to killing a ruthless dictator as a child, knowing that the child pretty much grew up to be a ruthless dictator. That scene was amazing, and I also like the scene where the Daleks actually turn on Davros and kills them. But the Daleks pretty much telling the audience that they'll become the most supreme power in the universe. So onto the performances, I must say that they're Oscar worthy. I'm not saying that because of my personal more biasness ish against the story, but I do think it's actually brilliant. Tom Baker is amazing in the story, and I actually do think that Genesis of the Daleks is his best performance as the Doctor, and the fact that his best performance actually comes so early into his era is just, it really says a lot. He has a lot of fantastic moments in the story, especially the "Do I Have the Right" speech, which I mentioned not too long ago. I also like the scene how he was trying very hard to resist telling Davros about how come the Daleks were defeated every time, obviously because of the safety of Sarah and Harry. I also like the scene when the Doctor was where he met the Time Lord in Scar, but the Doctor didn't know it was Scar. He's pretty much telling him that we have a chance for you to kill the Daleks, and the Doctor's like, no, I'm not doing it, and stuff like that. But the Time Lord didn't actually tell the Doctor it was the Daleks at first, but the Doctor obviously clearly didn't want to do it at first because he was pretty much the Time Lord's errand boy during his exile, but he pretty much done so because it was the Daleks. I also liked his speech when he mentioned the Daleks. I'm sorry, pardon me. I also like the part when at the end of the story when obviously the Doctor wasn't able to defeat the Daleks, like, so he's pretty much trapped them in the caves, and then the Doctor, Sarah, and Harry get a hold of the time ring, and they pretty much transport back to the Nova Beacon. And I also like his speech, and he was saying that despite the fact that he wasn't able to defeat the Daleks, he believes that there was some good in the universe. That's because of the creations of the Daleks and all that. Elizabeth Sladen, I would say she was great in this story. I would say that Genesis is her best performance as well as Sarah Jane. In Classic Who, anyways, I do think there are I think some of her better performances actually come maybe when she's in New Who and the Sarah Jane adventures. She had a great deal of to do, other than being captured a few times, especially in part 2 when she was, and a bit of part 3 when she was trying to escape from the Thaldom and ended up falling down, but something broke her fall on the way down. I also liked her involvement in the Doctor's "Do I Have the Right" speech. I obviously liked how she was trying to persuade the Doctor to actually go ahead and kill the Daleks. It's so good. Ian Marter, it was brilliant in this performance. I don't think this story is exactly his best performance, but it was without a doubt one of the best. I think he's still very good. He was with the Doctor for most of the story. Well, for most of the early part of the story, and I must say, Ian Marter's chemistry with Tom Baker is actually underrated. It's not really mentioned when talking about Doctor companion relationships and all that. It's actually very good and rather underrated. Side cast. They're all very good and probably the best side cast for season 12. The main ones were as follows. We had Garman. He was the head of the Colored Military Elite Scientific Corps and served under Davros. He realized that Davros was corrupt and got his troops to turn against Davros, which ended up costing him his life. I really liked his character and I thought he was a good ally for the Doctor. It was a shame he didn't get to see the end of the story when the Doctor actually was trapped the Daleks inside their base of operations for like a few thousand years. Then we had Severin. He was one of the Mutos that was living the wastelands of Skaro. He helped save Sarah Jane and later helped the Doctor and Benton to defeat Davros, and I think he was able to survive at the end of the story. I actually liked him. He was an okay character. We had Ronson. He was one of the senior researchers, and he was the first living being to be killed by a Dalek. It turns out he was against the creation of the Daleks because they lacked conscience and like the morality to do what's right and wrong, and he actually aided the Doctor to try and help him find those that could help shut down the Dalek project, but obviously, as I mentioned before, he got killed. He was a good character. We also had Betten. She was a Thal soldier and one of the major allies that helped the Doctor defeat the Daleks. She was responsible for placing the explosives on the cave doors to help entomb the Daleks, and after that, I think she helped rebuild Skaro. I think she was a very good character, and she was a very good ally. And I think in one of the Russell T Davies books that he made for Doctor Who during the first lockdown back last year, I think she was mentioned there, and I think she foresaw the Time Lords and the Daleks get destroyed in the whole moment thing when the Doctor blew up Gallifrey. Then we had Kravos. He was a coloured officer that worked in one of the bunkers in the away from the Thaldon. Obviously, Davros put a device on him that kept his heart beating, and Davros could pretty much turn it off, and he later died. He was a good character. We also had Raven, or Ravon. He was a young military officer that was in charge of the Kala Dome's defenses. He was a very tough leader, and I think he pretty much came up. Well, he was the one that actually came up with the phrase "total extermination of the Thousand." And obviously, the Doctor caught on to that and realized that's probably how the Khaleds became the Daleks, and the Doctor realized that the Khaled was pretty much, I think, an anagram of Daleks. He died when the Thals attacked the dome, and he was a good character as well. So on to the enemies of the story. I think they had quite a few. The first we had Nyder. He was the right-hand man of Davros. In addition to being a security commander, he was very submissive to Davros. He was a great side villain. He was very wormy, considering the fact he was played by Peter Morris, who's appeared on Doctor Who like 2 times before this story. It's a given. So he was later killed by the Daleks when they developed a mind for themselves, and when Davros pretty much told Nyder to try and kill the Daleks. Second of all, we have the Daleks. This is pretty much their origin story. They don't really do much because they're much of their genesis. But I think a lot of people criticize this story because the Daleks don't really do much, but I don't really think it's a fair criticism because this is their first ever appearance timeline wise in the story. So this is pretty much their birth, and we do get to see them do some damage in the story, and I do feel as if the establishing moment when they killed Davros was their establishing moment. That was actually pretty epic. And finally, we have the big bad Davros, the maker of the Daleks, and this is his first appearance ever. And he was written brilliantly and portrayed brilliantly by Michael Wisher. Wisher definitely captured that egotistical, psychotic side of Davros, even though I think Terry Malloy, I think that's what his name is. I think he was the one that played Davros in the 80s. I think he's my favorite Davros because he really got that psychotic side of Davros, and he was also very hammy as well, and that was pretty endearing. That's one of the reasons why I pretty much enjoyed the 80s Dalek stories, with the exception of Revelation of the Daleks, but I'll get to that when I get to the Sixth Doctor's era. I love how Davros was determined to make sure the Dalek become the most dominant beings in the universe. It's pretty evident when he tries to get the Doctor to pretty much betray every single being in the universe by telling him how the Daleks were defeated all the time. I mean, obviously, the Daleks end up killing Davros at the end because they want to be the most dominant beings in the universe. Davros does come back later in the Tom Baker era in Destiny of the Daleks, the story I haven't seen as of the filming of this review. In the storyline that continues until pretty much the Sylvester McCoy era. The only fault I probably have with the story is that part 1. It's a little bit slow, but to watch, but it's a slow build, and I can easily forgive that because the story after part 1 is pretty much a breeze to watch through, and it pretty much builds up to what's actually coming into the story. Another fault is how the part 2 cliffhanger was resolved. That's when Sarah Jane was trying to escape the Thaldon by climbing, but then she ends up falling. And in part 3, it turns out that she had fallen somewhere that pretty much broke her fall. That was a bit of a cop-out, but fair enough. But also, I didn't really like how she was written in this story a little bit because she was getting captured in some parts of the story, but it's not that bad compared to like later stories. So during her time in the TARDIS, I think it becomes pretty obvious that Philip Hinchcliffe pretty much wants to reduce Sarah Jane's character into a damsel in distress, and I didn't really think that was suitable for Sarah Jane anyways. So to conclude, I think Genesis of the Daleks is a phenomenal story with phenomenal moments, a debut of a very phenomenal villain, and then a story I would actually recommend to any Whovians want to get into Classic Who. It's not for story purposes, it's because of what the story actually contributes to the later Dalek Doctor Who mythology. So I give Genesis of the Daleks a well-deserved 10 out of 10. So my next review will be the final story of season 12, Revenge of the Cybermen, and this is the first time we'll see the Cybermen since Patrick Troughton's The Invasion. So thanks for watching this review. Please let me know your thoughts of Genesis of the Daleks and this review. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and please join my Discord server. The link is in the description below. Until then, see you later.